Hello and thank you very much for joining us on Upfront on JoyNews channel. And so with the ban on public gatherings still in force to the 31st of May, many have asked the question, can schools physically reopen when the president lifts that particular ban on public gatherings? So currently, we know that no date has been fixed, but with the Ghana Education Service calling for proposals for the reopening of schools, we find out today on Upfront, should schools physically open if the ban on public gathering is lifted? Can we ensure the safety of our children if they go to school? Or maybe we could use online learning as it is done in some private schools, or it will be an impossibility considering the lack of connectivity in many rural areas. Today, we want to explore this issue in detail. So why don't you join us on Twitter using the handle JoyNews on TV? Because I want to hear from all of you, particularly the parents. Would you be prepared to send your child to school if the president, lifts the ban on public gathering? My name is Winston Amwa, and this is Upfront on JoyNews channel. When we return after the break, I'll be introducing my guest, and then we get into the discussions. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is Upfront on JoyNews channel with me, Winston Amwa, and so today we've been joined by one man who knows it all, particularly, when it comes to education. Now, he's a former rector of the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, that's GIMPA. He's a proprietor of Christian High School and also the chairman of the Ghana Revenue Authority, as well as the chairman of the National Development Planning Commission. My guest is Professor Stephen Adai, who's going to be joining us shortly. But even before he joins us, you know that the teacher associations have also, kicked against the reopening of schools. They've actually told the president that, well, if you do not extend it beyond 31st May, we will defy you and not go to the classrooms because we believe that the current circumstances are not the best for teaching. But we've been joined by Professor Stephen Adai. And good evening, Prof, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Great. So there's been lots of concerns and lots of arguments about the possible reopening of schools, with the Ghana Education Service soliciting for proposals or ideas on how schools should be reopened if the president lifts the ban on public gathering on the 31st of May. You are an educationist. Should we be considering the physical reopening of schools if the ban on public gathering is lifted?
Well, first of all, I think that COVID is going to be with us for a longer time than we think. So even when some relaxation is put in place, we should still learn how to do things with COVID in view, whether it is factories, whether it is hotels or schools. I personally think that there's no doubt that our children cannot stay home all the time. Secondly, in the short to medium term, we cannot extend ICT, which is my preference, to all the schools and the children in the villages and everywhere else. I think that very soon, it has to be very soon, we must have a phased return to school. I believe that the most important one is to deal with the final years. All the rest, even you can manage it till the end of the year. But I think the final years, we should have a contingency for them immediately. Initially, the president asked the examination students to stay, and later on they were asked to go home. I believe this is where the double track must be put in place for all final years, because they were left with about 8 weeks to the examination. I believe that we can let them go to school in a double track, let half of them go to the school, occupying the whole school, half of them can practice all the social distancing and start them to finish their year. Secondly, when they finish the 8 weeks, the other half will also go. And then within round about the end of September, they can do their WASI and have it done with. In that case, we are not having any problem with some being in the rural area or some being in the city, some having computers and not. Okay. So I think that the first immediate one is to do double tracking or triple tracking to make sure that the final years WASSCE students finish their program.
But talking
the
about...
same can be done.
Yes, go ahead. I'm listening. Go ahead.
The same can also be done for the final year students in the university. So basically, you can then find a way of getting all the final years out. The rest, even if you have to extend the school year to start in January, for the next 9 months, January to September, you can finish a whole academic year by just virtually eliminating the holidays to 1 week each. And therefore, no year group will have lost. And that is, for me, my immediate line of action.
So let's look at the immediate line of action, because we're looking at, for instance, final year students who are dependent on WAEC, and WAEC has suspended, exams indefinitely. So under the circumstance, why would they be coming to school knowing that WAEC has not fixed a date for them?
Well, actually, to be honest, I think that can be done as soon as possible, because what we are saying is that take a school like Achimota. If I don't know the exact numbers, they have 3,000 students. If they have 1,000 in the final year, as soon as you double track them, you are having only 500 going to Achimota, all the facilities. With all under the supervision of their teachers, the 8 weeks they can complete their WASSCE, and then another program. And then the other batch comes for 8 weeks. By September, they do their WASSCE. But we do the same for the university students, the final years. And they can be double tracked, do it, because if you do eliminate the final years, both in the university and the secondary schools, you can afford to start you don't need to rush. Of course, if things get improved, you can start early. But you can wait till the end, even the whole calendar year, and start from January. And we have done it. When I was in the 6th going to the 7th grade, we did only 6 months in what we then call the 6th grade. And then we were changing the school year. We asked to go, and we never got any problem with our education. But let us deal specifically with the finalists to unblock the bottleneck.
And so in dealing with a finalist, how soon should the finalists be going to school?
Not later. I would even set as early as 1st of June.
1st of June? That means you're actually expecting the president to lift the ban on public gatherings.
Listening, there's not going to be, after all, yes, it's a public, this is not so much of a, don't we live in our communities? Don't people live in airport residential area, Nima at the moment? They do. So if you turn the school to only 1/3, and even the 1/3, they are going double track, you are having only 1/6 of it. They live in their home, they live in the community. The same way, there are so few now in the whole secondary school, they are occupying all the classrooms, only half of a year. So it's all the precautions that we take now in living our homes, in going to the markets, and that should therefore be in place. And therefore, I don't see, have we decided not to live in Nima or Choco or airport residential area again? We are living there, and there we have even greater control because the teachers are in charge.
But talking about teachers being in charge, Professor Adai, the distinction between being at home and being in school is that at home you have your parents with you. Yes, some might go to work, that's a fact. But the other challenge also is that if you are in school, you have fewer teachers attending to a lot of students. How will those teachers be able to deal with these students who might actually go contrary to the guidelines?
There will be fewer teachers. There won't be fewer teachers, because if you take Achimota, half of the teachers are to be in the school. Remember, they are not for one track from SHS 1 to 3. It's half a track of SHS 3 only. And therefore, half of the teachers of Achimota are more than enough. In fact, their ratio will be less than 1 to 10. So therefore, their control is very, very, very minimal. I mean, in my school, for example, even in the normal school term, we have only 10 students to a teacher. So this is what I'm talking about. You are reducing the numbers, but you are not reducing the teachers pro rata. So you are having 1/6. If you follow my system, you have only 1/6 of the students with more than at least 50% of the teachers plus the administrative staff. And the disciplines are easier in school even than at home, whereby you tend to be closer than in school. So you go to your dormitories, you are reducing the dormitories to 1/6. So there are other ways that we can do. And I think that we should look at it, and we will be able to get both the secondary school and the university final years out of the system.
How about the junior high school? How about the junior high school? You've talked about the secondary school and the universities. How about the JSS or JHS?
The JHS, to me, is not a big problem because, remember, they have more years. You can, even if we go to the end of the calendar year, I hope we won't go that far, you can still adjust for them to be able to go through the system. But let me tell you, if we don't focus on the final years in the secondary school and the university, then post-COVID, you will have a big problem. And that is where that type of bottleneck should be broken, and you will find out that the rest, you can easily manage it.
When it comes to the JHS, you're talking about we being able to adjust. How do we adjust when it comes to JHS final year students? Help us understand.
First of all, technically, even though Ghanaians and the government don't want to admit it, that BECE is not necessary because now everybody is to go to 18 years. We don't do BECE. It used to be a limitation of people not going. So what they have done before the lockdown, for me, it's sufficient even if you want to take them to go to secondary school. And so you can do an entrance examination, almost like a common entrance examination, so that the very weak students don't progress. And then, because if you promote very weak students, they get worse as they go on. So as for the JHS, there are so many ways of dealing with it. Now that de facto BECE is not a necessity. It's rather some sort of competency to find the student's ability. After all, when you go to America, there are only 2 subjects you have to do to go to university: Maths and English, SAT, and aptitude. And then at that level, we can do much more flexible ways of doing that than our straitjacket do BECE. So I can assure you that that adjustment is far more easier to do. And as I said, that in my 6th grade, going to the 7th grade, we did only 6 months.
Okay. Now, that is understood. That is understood. But when you say, for instance, that, okay, so the BECE, well, initially it was a termination point. It is no longer the case now. In effect, when it comes to our education, you're suggesting that secondary school education and tertiary education currently would be more important than basic education. I mean, is that the idea you're putting across, Professor Adae?
I'm saying that for the near future, dealing with not even the secondary school, the final year WASSCE students and final year university students are the most critical one, because if you don't concentrate on them, then you have a problem whereby you are either going to have another year lost, but if you are able to concentrate on them and eliminate them, hopefully by the end of the year, we will have gone through our COVID, and then we could then, when we come, the second years are going to the final years and the rest. And you just adjust the term, the length of the long vacations and other things. And this, to me, is the way out for the generality of the schools. For us, for example, in the school my wife and I founded, Ghana Christian International High School, we don't do BEC at all. For the past 6 years, we don't do BEC. They go straight. And at this moment, all of them have completed the second term. They are in the second week of the third term online, and they are going to complete all their WASI and Cambridge by the end of next month. So there are practical ways, but we must concentrate more on the public schools, which is my passion, because that's where 80% of our students in the basic school are, and about 90% of our secondary school. And I think that this is the way forward.
You talked about weak students. So you say that, those, they said for a common entrance, if they pass through, then they go. But government also has made it clear that as part of its plans, it doesn't want any child to be left behind. And that's also the reason why it's come up with, the free SHS and all of that. But so in that case, what happens?
Let me give you an example. In part of our school is based in the rural area to help the rural community where I come from, at Hiramwasi. You know that when the students come, we find that some of them are so weak that to ask them to go through the 3 years, you are just destining them to their grave academically. So immediately we divide the students into two. Those who are weak, and some of them are very weak. One of them started to say, write your village name, or say, Adiemra, they mean to mean super. That means I cannot spell Adiemra. That is his very village. He has finished supposedly JHS 3. So we split them into two, and half of them are able to do, especially those who come from the urban areas and the good students from the rural areas. They do their straightforward 3 years, and they pass. Some of them getting, even MasterCard scholarships for university. But the rest, we help them, and they actually end up doing it 4 years. We are not leaving them behind. We help them, and sad to say, 2 students, we had to let them do it for 5 years. But we never left them behind. If you push them through, and that's unfortunately many of the my villages, sad to say, the matter of their teachers have helped them bribe their way to get EC 111 when their knowledge is 999. They go to Parental and Latins, and after 3 years, they come back not able to pass our 10th grade examination. And these people are liabilities. So you are not leaving them behind. You want to find a way of helping them so that eventually they succeed.
So I mean, the points you make, great points. You're referring to your system. People come in there, you're able to look at them and say, you know what, you do not have the requisite knowledge for the class you say you want to get into. That's agreed. But the public system doesn't have that kind of luxury, if I could put it that way, that you have. So how will the public system be able to deal with it, Professor Ade?
Very simple. But at this moment, when they do the BEC, those who don't meet a certain pass are not admitted. Yes. So therefore, the public system has a discrimination. All that I'm saying is this. When they don't do this BC and you want them to go forward, you do a basic test to see that they can cope. And those who cannot cope with the secondary school work, don't leave them behind. Let them then join the 3rd year of the succeeding BEC people, junior secondary school, because it's so dangerous to let a child who has not acquired certain competencies continue. Because for example, mathematics, if your basis is wrong, there's no way you can build up. And if your language is not up to speed, you cannot do anything. So the discrimination is already there. They tell us that if you get 9 and 8 or so, you don't continue into secondary school, you repeat. The same way, so any system which says that a weak child must be pushed forward, you are not doing the child advantage. But in our case, we counsel them. They know it is for their good. And in fact, they have 2 hours extra And by the middle of the year, if some of them are good in the private school, you can do that one, ask them to join their colleagues. But it's not good to say that you have no discrimination, everybody must go.
Okay, so while we're talking about, the reopening of schools, one thing that we also should realize that teachers are a very important aspect of all of this. Now, the teacher unions have talked about how they do not expect schools to be reopening, and they do not expect the president to, lift the ban on public gatherings and the closure of schools on the 31st of May. Yeah. How do you respond to these teachers who are saying
I can see that you have written under my name, former rector of Gimpa, which is true, but I'm currently Professor Emeritus of Ashasi, so I'm not former. I left Gimpa 12 years ago. By the way, let me go on.
Thank you for that, yes.
Listen, I read the teachers one. In a sense, I agree with them. With another sense, I was very disappointed.
Why?
In their first, let me talk on the positive side, sure, because we are told that Ghanaians, we always focus on the negative. On the positive side, they are concerned what arrangement should, so that both the teachers and the students are protected. And the answer should not be, don't reopen school. In other words, and the positive side was the negative side. I was expecting that in order for us to go back to school, let us think about A, B, and C, and D. Nothing of them was in it. I don't think that the whole teachers can sit down and say, don't open because we are at risk, without thinking about, so what? The next is that, are they going to get their salaries to stay home for 3 years? These are realities. Already the government is bleeding in the budget.
Should they not be getting their salaries? Should they not be getting their salaries?
They must be prepared to reduce their salary by 50%.
Why should they reduce their salaries by 50%? They're public workers.
By distance.
Oh, they should use it by social distance. They're public workers, and they're expected to receive monthly payments.
Why? Who told you? Public workers does not mean that whether you work or not, you are entitled to your pay. And
we're
here, of course,
we're in difficult times,
survive. We must have the teachers. We must have the teachers when we reopen. But I expect some positive contribution. I mean, I'm a board member of an organization which I wouldn't like to mention on television. The workers themselves say that we are giving up 25% of our salaries. And you just go and tell the government, oh, don't open school, let us stay at home. And then you say nothing first about what should we do and the protocols towards reopening. Nothing. Nothing about your salary. You are going to stay at home. This is a sign of responsibility.
So talking about salary, you would have expected that while they're still at home, they will be making suggestions that they have a reduction in salary.
Say 25% or 50%, but also more positively, what must be done to help the students and what protocols must be put in place, which we have been discussing, so that the government can get advice when to open the school. Everybody can write a letter and say that, please make sure that you don't send me back to the workplace because the workplace is dangerous, but nothing about how to improve the workplace, nothing about your salary. Everybody can do that one. It's only the government which, because of course, politics and the elections and everything of that nature, they can stomach this. They should go and tell this to any private sector person. You will give them a belt.
Including yourself. If they tell you this, you'd have asked them to reduce their salaries.
I'll have to pack their. I'll have hacked their. Already my school, every teacher, even those who are teaching online, they have agreed that when the students are at home, they can't pay full fees. They have agreed to 50% salary reduction. And we are all, I have suspended my own income from there for 4 months because my salary will pay more teachers half salary for a longer time. This is the type of things we must do. But unfortunately, the government is like a community coach. Everybody thinks that, they can, somebody else will take care of it.
So let's look at what you would have expected them to do. Now, you've talked about the phased system. You've talked about maybe the double or triple track system. Apart from these things that you've talked about, what would you have expected to hear from the teachers by way of suggestions for the reopening of schools?
Well, of course, they are more than me, so therefore, but what I would have liked to hear from them generically is that at this moment, given the numbers, if you bring them, social distancing cannot be practiced. Therefore, thin it out. Let us, as I mentioned, have only the final years come in first. And even the final years, let them come in 2 streams, double track. Let us deal with them so that by August ending, they are out. Have the next academic year start from January, so that between September and December, we can also double or fourth track the rest and make sure that they are ready to go to the final year. Something like that. But for me, I don't go to a place, whether I'm working as a leader or anywhere else, with a fixed ideas. But the people must be putting their brains to work and coming out with advice to the ministers of education, to the government, as to the way forward. They should know more than the government, the politicians. And that's what I expect from them.
Great, but let's look at one other thing. So these are teachers who have said, well, Mr. President, if you lift the ban, if you say schools are reopened now, it would be difficult for us to teach. Now, if that person isn't willing to teach, people say you can force a horse to the riverside, but you can't force the horse to drink. How do you ensure the teachers give up their best if they are not willing to teach, Professor Ade?
Well, I think that I have dealt with that on several occasions. The question is that not all of them, but many of our teachers, with COVID or not COVID, are not teaching, and we see the results. If the average over 60% of our students finish 9 years and are functionally illiterate, the answer to that is different. The answer which I've always proposed, because I was a certain teacher, I was teaching in the primary school, is giving autonomy to the head teachers who must be selected on the willingness to manage well and training them, and then giving them the authority to select their teachers and to discipline them and to fire them. When I was a teacher, if I didn't make my notes by Sunday evening, every subject I'm going to teach, by the hour and everything else, and gave it to my head teacher, I couldn't go to classroom. And if I did that for a week, I have no job. And my head teacher writes to the education officer, and that is it. We must, when it comes to managing them, how can people then and hold them responsible, say they are not willing to teach? When you are not willing to teach, I fire you. But at this moment, a teacher in Obuasi who was not teaching, attending class in a Roman Catholic school, of course, government school, the father says, please, why are you doing this? You know what he told him? He says that, Father, you can do me nothing. You can write to the Minister of Education and nothing will happen to me.
Really?
And the father told me, not that I heard it on the grapevine.
So in effect,
the management issue, decentralizing, empowering. That is why they are fighting the decentralizing to education level, district level. In fact, when it comes to school management, unless you decentralize to the school level and give the power and authority to the head teacher and hold them accountable, we will be paying school teachers the same way as you wash your hands and you drain the water, it goes out as the waste pipe.
Exactly, but Professor Ade, we have a situation now where we cannot, you evaluate to the fact that we are in, abnormal times. So you cannot say you're firing those teachers who probably would go home and add up to those that you believe.
That's why I'm saying that.
When it happens like that, how do you insist that he works, assuming he decides not to show up? And assuming he comes in, doesn't prepare his notes or prepares no shably.
If he doesn't show up and doesn't produce, you are not getting my point. This is the only country whereby you say that a teacher may decide that he will not show up. And even when you show up, and some of them have already have a slogan, they call it presenteeism. That means he will be present, but not do their work.
Exactly.
And yet, the reason why they do that is that they will be allowed to get away with their murder. Nobody will discipline them. And there's no way in the world, if Joy FM, if you don't show up, if you show up, you don't do your work, and nobody tells you anything or disciplines you, I tell you, you will sleep till 10 a.m. before you come to work. So that one is up to us and the government to decide whether we will live on this forever, or at a certain point, we are going to hold people accountable, and therefore they must earn their pay. And that is not only teachers, it is every sector.
Okay. Well, talking about earning pay, well, currently I'm working, I'm not sleeping, and I never will show up at 10 a.m. That's just by the way, Professor Stephen Adai. So we'll have to go for a short break. When we return after this break, we'll continue with the conversation, because it's also important that we look at the parent angle. Now, 2 weeks ago when we had a program on the Super Morning Show on Joy FM, majority of parents who called into the show said, you know what, even if the president lifted the ban on public gatherings and said schools could reopen, we are not sending our children to school. We do not think that we are out of COVID-19 yet. We don't want to risk the health of our children. How do we get those parents into believing that they can actually send their children to school? This is Upfront on JoyNews channel with me, Winston Amwa. We'll be right back after the break. All right, so welcome back from that break, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is Upfront on the JoyNews channel, and I am Winston Amwa. Today we're speaking with Professor Stephen Adai, who is Professor Emeritus at Ashesi University. We're discussing, the reopening of schools. We're looking at the risk, and we're looking at the rewards. We're looking at the implications that it might have on, one, the students. We're looking at the teachers. We're also going to be discussing, issues concerning the parents, because I was telling you just before the break that on the Super Morning Show on Joy FM 99.7, a lot of parents who, joined the conversation said they're not willing to let their children go to school. They believe that COVID-19 isn't over yet, and they just can't risk their children in school. So, Professor Adai, let's look at this other point. A lot of parents say, look, we won't allow our children to go to school. We are not going to do that because we're scared. We can't risk their lives. Would prefer they stay at home. How about that? All right, so we'll get back to you, Professor, and I think that is a bit of a challenge with your, audio. So we'll try and rectify that so that we continue with a conversation. So I think if it's better now, Professor Adai, yes, can you hear me? Okay, so there's a bit of a challenge there. We'll try and rectify that with Professor Stephen Adai. I think that we can't hear him when he speaks, but you can definitely join the conversation also. I've been telling that you can join us on Twitter, Twitter handle JoyNews on TV. So let's have a conversation. Tell us whether you're prepared to get your children to go to school if schools are reopened. Yes, Professor Adai. So you're making a point about parents who are not willing. Yes.
Okay. Let me tell you, first of all, let me ask a very cynical question. Which of the parents? Let me tell you that this will be coming from middle class, upper class people who have their television, their children can listen, they have their Chromebooks, computers, and everything else. I include my own daughter, who is the top class, the best biology teacher in Australia for the 2 years running. He's keeping her two daughters at home because she doesn't need them to go out. But go and ask the average typical parent who is not a middle class, upper class. Yes, he's not saying so, but of course he wants their children to be alive, and therefore.
Hello, Professor Adai. Yes, I think it's better now. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, that assure their safety. They will be so much willing, and if the rest who can afford to homeschool their children won't send their children, at least
Well, I think there's a bit of a challenge with the connection. We'll try and rectify that so that we get back to Professor Stephen Adey. Okay, I think it's better now, so let's get back to Professor Adey, and we apologize for that. So Professor Adey, well, we'll get to Professor Adey shortly. And so we've been discussing, the reopening of schools. That say if the president lifts the ban on public gatherings and says that these schools can reopen, and we're finding out the implication of the risk that we face if we have to do so. Already Professor Stephen Adey has told us that there should be a phased reopening. So the final year in the secondary school and the universities, come in and run a kind of a double track or a triple track system. He believes that it's very important at this point to focus on, secondary school students, and those at the universities, because as for BEC, there's not really much of, while it's important, it's not really much of a necessity. Let's get back to Professor Stephen Adey, and I hope that the lines are better now. Yes, Professor Adey, you're making a point. Please continue.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yes, what I was saying is that if some upper class and middle class can afford to train their children at home, and therefore they won't take their children, at least they reduce the numbers in the average parent is itching for their children to go back to school. It is up to us, the government and teachers and all, to work together to make sure that the environment improves for them to go. But not the idea that, we won't take our children to school. The average parent in Ghana is not saying that.
Well, when we activated the phone lines at the time, Professor Stephen Adey, many of the persons who joined us said they were not willing. Of course, we cannot determine whether that's the average, parent or not. But isn't that an indication? Doesn't that give you an idea of the feeling out there? Doesn't that give you an idea of the feeling out there?
The COVID is so dangerous. Nobody will take their children. We are talking about phase one, making sure that certain protocols are in place. We are not talking about throwing them into the lion's den.
Great.
So
we're going to go for a break shortly, but the challenge with this is that while COVID is very dangerous, I'm sure the stigmatization would tell you how Ghanaians see it. And so if people are stigmatizing, it clearly tells you that, look, there's a lot of ignorance and there's a lot of fear associated with it. And it's going to be difficult for these people to bring their wards back to school quickly. What we'll do is that we'll go for a short break. When we return, we'll get Professor Stephen Adey to, address all those issues here on Upfront on JoyNews channel with me, Winston Amma. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back, and we apologize for that hitch in the sound quality. But let's get back to Professor Stephen Adey, who's a Professor Emeritus at Ashesi University. So, Professor Adey, you're making a point about parents. Yes, go ahead. Hello, Professor Adey. Yes, Professor Adey, well, you are making a point about parents because we're discussing the fact that a lot of parents have also indicated their unwillingness to send their children to school if schools are reopened. They believe that around this time is not the best of times, it's not safe to send children out there, and that would prefer that the president would hold on in saying that in reopening schools. You have said that these parents are actually parents who are in the middle and upper classes. While we cannot determine that because it was a phone-in session, how is that going to affect? How is that likely to affect the reopening and having students in school to learn and sit for the exam?
First of all, I don't think that the president is going to order schools to be back unless the COVID situation has improved. So that's why I and you cannot tell when. But whenever it is reopened, there will be some danger and some parents may not feel comfortable. And those people can homeschool their children. That's no problem. They can homeschool them and then they can do NOVDEC. That's the issue. So I'm not saying that, hey, let them reopen the schools. For example, I asked for a stage one. Let's have very few students, the final year students, let them go in 2 batches. So that you have only 1/6 of our children going to school.
Exactly, but that's what the challenge also is, because even with a phased reopening or return, people would still have to go to school, and these parents would have to make a choice whether to send their wards to school.
Yes, they can make the choice. Parents should always have the choice. But what I'm saying is this. When you say there are going to be only 500 students in Achimota, mark it on the wall. 400 of them will take their children there. Let the 100 not say they'll go. If you go to the village, or 500, the village schools will be there. So what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, nobody should take away parental choice. If they have alternatives for their children, that is their choice. But what I'm saying is that as a country, we should make an arrangement whereby the possibility of a child going to the school will not be at undue risk. After all, when you are crossing a road, you can also die. I'm not a medical expert at all, I'm an economist. But I can assure you, COVID will be mitigated and managed, but it will be with us for years. It's a virus which has come. And when flu viruses come, every year, if you go overseas, they have a flu season. What is happening is that we must learn how to manage it, and especially so that the possibility of mass infection will be reduced. And hopefully, if there's a vaccine or other means, even when you get it, it's like getting any other flu. Then we will be living with it. But I'm not a doctor, but if anyone says that we'll be over with COVID totally within the next 3 years, you do listen to British Airways, they said that they are not likely to see a full recovery of the airline business for 3 years. I will say that our children are going to not be educated for 3 years. Forget it. That will be a worse disaster.
Okay. Finally, if you go to some institutions, if you go to the University of Professional Studies, for instance, they resorted to online studies and currently are having examinations, take-home examination. When it comes to tertiary education, should that be the way to go?
Definitely, we will use more ICT. There's no way even at the secondary level, all at the Ghana Christian International High School, all the Cambridge students are the next 4 days taking examination online. But there are certain protocols. For example, while they are at home, we have a means whereby every student is on a screen being monitored.
Okay.
So, of course, they have only about 120 or so students, so you can do that easily. But these are the type of things which must be put in place. So we must find a way to ensure. But fortunately, they are there. My executive director for ICT shocked me. He said that, they're able to call the parent a home. This child is having some difficulty with his work. Please turn his computer this way, that and that. So there's a much more options now. And at the university, when they are a bit older, but the truth is that some university students even don't have computers. And these are the things we should be looking at, because when you computer, the fact that he's in UPS, you must find a way of making sure that he has access to the computer.
All right.
And then you have also the protocols, as I've just described, whereby there's a certain time everybody is taking the examination, and wherever they are on their computer, like I'm speaking to you, they are all being monitored on the screen. There are so many other ways of doing things. Now, ICT is quite advanced.
Well, Professor Stephen Adai, thank you so much for joining us today on our Front on JoyNews channel. We are very grateful to you. There's an ongoing conversation. Do have a lovely evening. That'll be all from us today on our Front on JoyNews. My name is Winston. I'm on behalf of the production team, Samuel Dami and the rest of us all. Thank you very much. Up next is JoyNews Prime. Have a lovely evening.